Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just want to do a quick lesson on money supply. And so I just got kind of curious to see how much money, physical money, has been printed, if I even have access to that information. So I came across the website for the St. Louis Fed, and they do publish this data, so that's good. Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. But let's just go with it. So the first thing that I needed was U.S. population by year. And so this first tab is just a straight dump of the information, again, from the St. Louis Fed. And, it publishes the U.S. population by year, and it goes all the way back to 1960, and it has up to last year. So this is important, and I'll explain why in a second. Then the next thing I wanted to know was the amount of physical money that is out there. And so this same site publishes that actually by week, in billions of dollars. And then so I had to add a couple columns just because I'm going to take an average, and I just extracted the year from the first column. But for the most part, this tab is also untouched, from what came out of the Fed's Excel data dump. And so, but it gives you the currency in circulation in billions. And like I said, I just took an average by year. And then I wanted to see the amount of physical money that's out there per U.S. person. That was the first thing I wanted to see. So I made this kind of summary table. So the first column is the year. Second column is the average currency in circulation by year. And that's in just raw dollars because I converted it out. So you can see that is $173 billion in 1984, went up to 1.6 trillion in 2017. So you can see the amount of physical money has increased quite a bit. And so for me, from a sort of a money management perspective, one would think the main, if not the only reason to make more and more currency is to deal with an increase, in your population. Because if you have more and more people, presumably you would have more and more transactions, and then you would need more and more money to handle all those different transactions. Literally almost from birth, it's like every year at the end of the year, the Fed would just look at the population, whether it's gone up or down, and, make decisions on whether to take back a certain amount of credit if the population has gone down significantly, or inject more money into the system if the population has grown quite a bit. And then, that allows money velocity to stay constant, and people have access to money, to do business amongst themselves. And so we'll look at the ratio of the average currency in circulation to U.S. person in a second. The next column that I made was credit supply. I used an estimate of a 10% reserve ratio, which is used in the U.S. for banks that have over a certain amount of holdings. And so, again, this is just an estimate. Every bank will, depending on, again, how much it holds, will have a different requirement, and they might adhere to it differently. So this is just very much a ballpark, but let's use it maybe as an upper bound. So here you can see back in 1984, with that much physical currency, 173 billion, they would have, as a country, we would have had 1.7 trillion available to us in terms of credit, like what banks can offer to the world. And then so next column is the U.S. population. Again, I got that from the St. Louis Fed. And then I just did printed money per U.S. person and then credit per U.S. person. So first off, you can see, the population went from 235 million to 325 million. But the printed money per U.S. person went from $734 in 1984 to almost 5,000. So that's a major issue because, the question then is where did that money go? Did it go to each individual family, as the family grew, or, every year each person should have received really some way, indirect or direct, a sort of truing up, okay, this year we printed this much more money, the population is here, this is the difference per person, and then, we send it out to everybody. So their currency, their amount that they have is not being diluted. It's being kept up with the amount that is physically printed. Because, obviously if you have a system like this and it's a centralized entity, which we have, they could just print money and then we don't know where that's going. And let's say it goes into people's hands, certain small few people, then, you're obviously diluting the value of everybody else's currency, and they're not able to keep up with this increase of printing and money. And so that's clearly happened. I mean, this ratio went from 737 to 4776, when ideally, the number should stay fixed. It's not a number that should vary very much, and certainly not go up by this much. So the average U.S. person is getting screwed just strictly by the amount of physical money that's being printed. I think that's kind of obvious now. But here's an incredible thing too with the banks, is that because the way that this fractional reserve system works, each bank then has this much money per person. So for every new person that is born, in 1984, for example, it would have $7,000 worth of credit to offer based on, per individual in the United States. So that's the amount that it was in 1984. But you can see now it's almost $50,000. So for every person that's out there, they're putting their money into a bank. We're pretty much all required to now. And then so that gives, these banks just an incredible amount of reach through this fractional reserve lending concept. And so essentially what's happening is, like, when we put $1 into a bank, they're then saying, okay, we have one physical dollar. We can now print, just for simplistic simplicity, we'll say I can print 9 other dollars, credit notes, and then I can use that and lend those out to somebody else. As long as your $1 stays in my bank, then, I can lend out these other 9 and then charge interest on that. And I get to decide, what, gets built up and what gets financed, and the type of businesses that are able to get created, and all that kind of stuff. And obviously that gives them quite a bit of control, because once you're lending out money, you obviously have some quote unquote equity, even though it's a loan. You have some interest in the business in order to steer it. And banks, will have certain requirements, or require the company to keep certain ratios, and obviously report their results, and then they can pull the plug. They can do a lot of different things once they're financing the company. And so it gives them an incredible amount of power, but it's all based on the platform and the foundation of the physical amount of money that's in their possession, which is not theirs. It's all of ours. And then the funny thing is like, they essentially are funding all these businesses, which employ the very people that put money into those bank accounts that allow them to, like I said, finance those companies. And then they're just paying them with their earnings. So they're financing the companies, allowing them to exist, steering them. And then with that company's earnings, you're essentially getting, a piece of that, of the earnings of that company. And then you're 99.9% of the people right now are putting that money right back into a bank account. And then it increases their ability to lend even more, because now their borrowing base, their ability to lend is increased, because now the amount of actual money in their account is expanding. And so it's kind of this cycle that we're essentially feeding banks, giving them more and more leverage, feeding a bank every month with our paycheck, and giving it more and more expanse, and like expanding the credit supply, and essentially expanding their reach and their power. And they're not doing anything. This is the whole problem, is like it's not a value add kind of thing. It's like they're holding digital money now, which is like not even, it's not like they're keeping it quote unquote safe or anything like that, because there's hacking and all that kind of stuff. But that's just the nature of this system. It's if they were actually keeping it in a vault, physically keeping it safe, insuring it, in some kind of way. And people will say obviously that there's some kind of insurance, but when there's bank runs and there's all this chaos, and when there's this much credit out there, that if people were to go to their banks, and even just a few people were to go ask for a certain amount of money, they would not be able to support that, because like I said, the reserve requirement is only 10%. So that's a pretty small amount of the amount of credit that's actually out there. And so, these kind of things, we'll throw insurance things, FDIC and all that out the window if we ever have a panic, and so this sort of iterative thing, this feedback loop, this mechanism to just give banks more and more power. Ultimately, the main problem, the reason that this will have to stop at some point, it cannot go on forever, is when basically people start needing money. It's like when their bank balances, and we could obviously the Fed, these are the numbers that they're actually looking at, but once the drawdowns start happening and there's no replenishment of this sort of borrowing base, then that's when the expanse and the reach of this credit monster basically retracts. And once they and they have metrics that they see that happening, when there's less and less people utilizing the businesses that they've started, and financed, like all these retail, all the the car industry, all the apps and all the different things. Once all the consumerism starts shrinking and slowing down, this feedback loop slows down, the credit supply shrinks, and all that kind of stuff. So once people start needing to spend their money, withdraw more than they're able to put in, and that happens obviously when a person's employed, when they're just living paycheck to paycheck, and there's many articles on that, especially on Zero Hedge. And so when people are running really, really low bank balances, progressively, drawing it down, then that essentially takes away the power of this entire system, and that signals the end, when it starts retracting, when unemployment starts increasing. And, we just saw today, GM is, firing 15% of its staff, which is 1 in 6 people. That's significant. A lot of executives will now be looking for high-paying jobs because they're used to that lifestyle. And 3 plants are being closed down in the very least, and I noticed one was in Canada. So, I think it was in Oshawa. But there's these are major things. When hourly people lose their job, they might have been working there for a long time, maybe multiple generations, and stuff, and they're not robust financially. Most people, like I said, are living paycheck to paycheck here, and I'm assuming Canada is exactly the same, if not possibly worse than what we have here. And so this thing will unravel very, very, very quickly, because obviously they'll deplete their savings, their checking accounts, the savings account first, and that puts banks in a weaker position in terms of the kind of earnings and stuff that they'll be able to get. So whenever you see banks struggling, Deutsche Bank and all the bank stocks going down, that's the major sign that things are really bad, because they're not really doing anything. They're not physically producing anything. They're not really any value add to society at all. They're just again creating a credit supply, and then leveraging other people's money, and then using that to charge other businesses interest, and then like I said, recycling part of that money back to the people that deposit into their banks, and then the cycle continues. And so that will only work if the businesses that they've created are self-sustaining, and able to actually stay in business and keep the money velocity going. But we obviously see now with all these car dealerships, or car manufacturing facilities shutting down, and all the retail and all that stuff closing, that all these businesses that the banks have financed were just purely based on consumerism, and very, very detached from the fundamental needs of anybody. And so they by definition cannot sustain themselves forever. And so we're seeing this, basically this monster, that was created through fractional reserve banking and this money printing, and all that stuff, looks like it's coming to an end. And we've basically financed our own enslavement. It's like we've literally, it's not funny, but it's like we've literally been paying banks to create companies that will enslave us, and we just let it happen. It's like they literally are doing absolutely nothing, but they're able to take our money, multiply it, and then make money off of it, and then give us back like a tiny, who knows even how much we get from savings in our savings account. And most people don't have very much money in their savings. I remember years ago, like I got like a moving bonus or something, and so I had like the most I maybe ever had in my checking account, like around $20,000, and I went to like a Bank of America just to set up a new account in New Jersey, and like they treated me like I was like, some sheikh from the Middle East. They were like, "Oh man, Mr. Patel, is one of our preferred." It's like, and I'm not saying 20,000 is nothing. I'm not trying to, trivialize the struggles of people, but like, that clearly is not common. It's like the average American is not sitting on, a bank account that has even $10,000 in it. That's just not their reality. And so even if the savings percentage was good, it's not like they're, raking in money off that anyway. But the banks are, because they're multiplying whatever that number is, even if it's $100 times 10, lending it out and then charging interest on it, and then, able to steer a company and essentially own a company until they pay it off in full. And so this is the world that we live in. I just wanted to, put that out there for people to get a feel for this enslavement that we've financed. And all these files are public info if anybody wants this actual file. Double check it and stuff. But I didn't manipulate the numbers really at all, just pulling numbers straight from the file that's on the Fed website. But, I can send it to you if you guys want to take a look. All right, hope everyone's doing well. Take care. Bye.